Today I'm going to be taking a look at the latest wave of Marvel Legends figures, which is of course themed on the Age of Apocalypse X-Men. Now this is actually the second wave we've had based on Age of Apocalypse, and we seem to be roughly getting one wave per year. But I'm actually pretty excited for this wave because this definitely has some of the key characters from that story arc. And of course, as usual, each of these figures, except Magneto, comes with a piece of a Builder-Figure which builds up Colossus. And I'll be checking him out in a separate video later in the week. So I'll start off by looking at the packaging. Now the packaging is pretty much standard across the whole wave. It's pretty much the standard Marvel Legends packaging that we've come to know and love over the last couple of years. It's essentially a giant window display with the logo of the series that it's representing, in this case X-Men, and of course it has the Marvel Legends logo at the top. The reverse of the packaging has usually some artwork. In this case, this is artwork that I think has been commissioned for this series, isn't actually taking it from the comics themselves. There's a little bit of a bio about the character, and then the other figures in this wave. On the side panel of these packaging, we can see some more of that artwork. So it's the same artwork replicated, except this time with Apocalypse's head looming over them. And yeah, I think this is really great. When you put them together like this, it looks really presentable and very, very displayable. And I think they look nice, bright, colourful, and depending on who the artist is and your personal preferences, can just make a fantastic display piece in their own right. There's a cardboard inlay, however you want to call it. There's a piece of cardboard in there that holds the plastic figure in place, and this is quite nice because they've actually, put an image of Apocalypse himself here, which is quite cool. And yeah, again, it's nice bright blue there, so it looks really good in or out of the packaging. Now we'll start off by looking at the Magneto. Now, out of this wave, there was two figures that I was really excited to get my hands on, and Magneto was one of them. I always really liked his look in this series, and I really liked the character as well, and gave him a chance to be a hero for a change. And on first glance, he's very presentable, he looks really nice. I think they've done a decent job with their sculpt, and the colours are nice and bright. But there's definitely some issues with the silver buttons on his collar there. Sadly, the paint wears away pretty quickly, so be careful. Thankfully, his pigtails are flexible, but sadly the rest of the hair isn't. That's a pretty hard, solid piece. His cape there is pretty hard as well, and you can see it's all one piece. The shoulder pads and the cape is one piece. As you can see, this is quite a hard plastic. There's a little bit of give in it, but not an awful lot, and this is definitely going to be a problem when it comes to articulation and posability. The other issue I have with this figure is the real lack of a paint wash. I think the mould, the sculpt is absolutely fantastic, but it really would be supported and aided by a nice wash going over just to accentuate and highlight all that detail. But sadly, it's just not there, so we just get these solid plastic pieces, a solid red cape, solid red legs, a torso, purple gauntlets, purple belt, but there's no detail in there. And a good paint wash over it would just really accentuate this and make it pop, and sadly it doesn't, which means it feels a little bit cheaper. And this leads me on to the articulation. Now, straight away you can see here, turning his head, although it's that ball jointed neck, so it should allow him to turn all the way around, sadly it won't. The solid hair piece there plays havoc against the solid cape. The movement is all there, but it's just sadly can't get past the hard plastic pieces in place there. And I think this could have been overcome if the hair had been a softer plastic, but as it is, you are extremely limited in terms of what you can do with the head. The good news though is that the cape and the collar is movable, so at least it can come away, and it does work with the articulation a little bit. So those ball jointed shoulders there, although a little bit stiff on mine, they do kick all the way out and up as you would expect from a Marvel Legends figure, which is great. He's got the bicep swivel as well, and of course he's got the double jointed elbow. Sadly, there is no swivel at the gauntlet. I thought there would be at the top of the glove there, but there isn't. But he does have the usual pin swivel at the wrist. I mean, of course, he can spin his hand right the way around and arc it backwards and forwards. Now, the gauntlet does have a plastic piece that goes over a little bit, so you're going to have some difficulties with this. If you want to bend the wrist right the way back against that gauntlet, it's going to run into some resistance. Thankfully though, he does have the swivel at the waist, which is good, and he does have an ab crunch here. But once again, we can see how this is running into resistance from the cape. So he can bend forward a really good distance, no problem, but he should be able to bend back a lot further. So you see, if you really force it, you can get him back here, but the cape, it makes it very difficult. He's got the Marvel Legends hips, which are great, so of course they do kick out to the side. There's the swivel at the upper thigh as well. The legs kick forwards, they go back, and there is of course the double jointed knee there as well. He's also got a swivel at the boot cut there, just at the top of the boot, which is cool, so it's nicely hidden, but it looks really good. And he's got the ankle pivot as well, so of course the foot can hinge from side to side, but it can also kick upwards and backwards as well, which is great. Now Magneto is the one figure in the wave that doesn't come with the Builder-Figure piece, but he does come with an extra head with the helmet, 2 closed fists, and a couple of effects. None of these pieces are new, we've seen all of these before, but I'm glad to have them, and I think the extra head is a nice touch. The only problem is that rather than getting better with the second head, actually they get worse. It's even harder to pose this head and have him look in any other direction other than straight on. It can be done, but it's such a chore, and yeah, it feels like there's such a lot of resistance to it that it's almost not worthwhile. So with all of that said, how do I feel about the figure? Well, for me, I have to give this 3 stars. I think the sculpt is very nice. I think in essence, it's a pretty decent figure all in all. But yeah, just the issues there with the hard cape and the lack of being able to pose that head properly is a real problem here. And this combined with the lack of paint apps just make the figure feel a little bit cheap and a bit disappointing. Next up, we have Legion. Now, I have to be honest, Legion isn't a character that I probably would have picked up single-carded if not for the Builder-Figure piece. I've never particularly been much of a fan of the character, despite him kickstarting the whole of the Age of Apocalypse saga. I just never particularly liked the look or the design of the character. With that being said, I'm very pleasantly surprised by this figure. For starters, I think the head sculpt is really cool. I think they've definitely captured the look of madness in the face there, which looks really, really cool. And I think even the hair is really well done. Like this is individual little hairs at the top here, the hard plastic, and it looks and feels really cool. And in sharp contrast to Magneto, I think the paint apps are fantastic on the body pieces here. We've got that little bit extra shade in different key places to make it just look a bit more interesting, realistic, detailed, and it works a treat. It takes a fairly boring concept or fairly plain outfit and makes it visually interesting. And I may be wrong, but I think these are new pieces. The short cuff trousers and the feet, I could be mistaken, maybe they have been used before. I don't have every Marvel Legends figure, but these look new to me. So how does he fare with the old articulation? Pretty good. He's got the ball jointed head there, so he can look right the way around. He can look up and down a really huge distance. This is spot on. He's got ball-jointed shoulders, and yeah, they do the job. They kick right the way up and out there. No hindrance at all from the surrounding plastic, which is fantastic. He's got the swivel at the bicep, the double-jointed elbows, and of course he's got the pin swivel at the wrist as well. He's got quite a high ab crunch. It's very effective. He can bend forward a good distance and bend back a really good distance. It might be a little bit unseemly. It depends how you feel about it. It doesn't bother me too much, but it is a bit obvious. He does of course also have the swivel at the waist, the same ball jointed hips as on Magneto, and of course he's got the upper thigh swivel there as well. Legs kick forwards, out and backwards, and he has the double jointed knees there, so he can get his legs right the way back, which is pretty cool. There's also a swivel at the bottom of the trouser there, which is really good, and he's got the ankle pivot, so of course it will arch up and down and swivel from side to side. And aside from the builder piece, sadly he only comes with an extra pair of closed fists, no other accessories, although to be fair, I'm not quite sure what else I would have given him, maybe some effect piece or something. Overall for me, this is probably a 3-star figure. I do think this is actually a really strong figure. I think the articulation is great. I think they've got a great head sculpt. I think everything works really, really well on it. I like that they've made the extra effort to put some shading on him there to make the figure just a little bit more visually interesting and appealing. But he is very light on accessories, and ultimately I can't get away from the fact that, you know, this is just a Legion figure. He's not a character I'm mad about, and there is something kind of dull about his look. But I do think Hasbro have done a fantastic job here and done the best he possibly could have done. However, things take a steep upswing with Sabretooth or Victor Greed. For a start, he's quite oversized, so he's got that bigger build. He's basically using the same base body as Cyber from the recent Wolverine Marvel Legends set. And on opening him, he just seems a lot bigger than any other Sabretooth figure I've ever owned in the Marvel Legends line. And I really like this first head, which has a slight smirk, and you can see one of his teeth poking through there. It looks really, really good. It's rare for a sculpt of Sabretooth to capture this side of his character, so I'm really pleased to see it here. I also really like the effort they've made with the sculpt of the collar. Again, those buttons there, but also just some of the chips and wear there, just make it look a little bit more like leather, a little bit more used, lived in, and I think it's very effective. The only downside is they've been very selective with the paint wash, and he really could have done with it in his hair, just to, accentuate some of the grooves and the cut that they got there. I do think they've done a good job with the arms though, getting the hairs in there, and you can see that paint wash over them, so that looks really good. It looks quite realistic and quite detailed. And I do believe they've got a very faint wash going throughout the torso as well, and it just highlights some of the muscle groups there, and it works really well. Likewise, the sculpting's really good on the gauntlet glove. I think it looks really nice. Again, could have just used a little bit of a paint wash. And the same again for the boots. Very nice mould, sculpted really, really well. And I think these may be a brand new piece as well. I don't recall seeing these boots before on another character, not an oversized character like this. So these may be brand new for Sabretooth. I could be wrong. But again, how much better would these look if they just had a paint wash going over them just to accentuate all these little cuts and grooves in there? It just would have really popped. But the articulation is very, very strong, so his head, of course, does spin all the way around. It looks down a little bit, looks up all the way, which is really fab. I think they've done a really good job with this. Again, it is that ball-jointed neck, but it works really well. Of course, he's got the ball-jointed shoulders as well, which are nice and easy and smooth. He's got the bicep swivel, and he's got the single-jointed elbow, which bends to 90 degrees, which is great. And he's got that pin swivel at the wrist, and there's no hindrance there from the top of the gauntlet or the wrist, which is brilliant. It's got the ab crunch as well, which, as you can see, goes forward and backwards a really good distance there, and there's no hindrance whatsoever, which is fantastic. Likewise, swivel at the waist, and there's no problems here whatsoever. The belt is a separate piece, and it just works very nicely. Legs kick out to the side, upper thigh swivel. They kick up, they kick backwards, and he's got the double jointed knees. Now, sadly, there is no swivel at the top of the boot. I thought there would be, but actually there isn't. And then finally, for the accessories, he comes with an extra snarling head, a pair of closed fists, and two separate ponytails, one for each head, to slot in the back of the head. And here is the snarling head with the ponytail, and yeah, looks pretty good. Again, fantastic head sculpt, really like this. Now, this isn't the first time we've had an Age of Apocalypse Sabretooth. We did get one from Toy Biz years ago. He was a lot smaller, and by comparison, he looks a lot weaker, to be honest. I think the head sculpt is a little bit off, and yeah, I just think this new version is way better. So for me, this is an easy 4-star figure. Great sculpt, nice paint job, fantastic articulation, and a couple of fun extras as well. So what stops it being 5-star? Well, I think it just needed a little bit of an extra paint wash here and there just to accentuate some of the new pieces that we've got, the boots, maybe the collar, maybe a little bit more in the torso as well, and definitely in the hair. Moving on to Shadowcat, I have to be honest, this wasn't a figure I was highly anticipating. I've never been much of a Kitty Pryde fan, to be honest. But I have to say, her look here is way better than any others. And the character's almost completely different, and this works for me really well. And I have to say, this figure really surprised me, because I had pretty low expectations, and I thought she might be like the Jean Grey from last year, the last wave of Age of Apocalypse figures we got. And that was one I was really looking forward to, and I was very disappointed with. But I'm really pleased to say that's not the case here. So first up, the head sculpt, I think is an interesting choice. She's got a very unexpected head sculpt. She looks very shocked or disgusted. But to be fair, I think that works really quite well. Once again, I would have preferred them to just put a little bit of a wash through the hair there, because the sculpt is really nice. It just needs something to just make it look a bit more realistic and less plastic. But, overall, I think they've done a really nice job with the paint apps. And I have to say, I'm not sure what the paint they've used is for the blue on the body, but I think it works really, really well. There are times when it looks almost metallic and it just gives off this slight sheen, which is really effective. And I think, yeah, the colours on this figure are just fantastic, actually. I really like the sculpt of the hands, and she's got those extra gauntlets there, which sadly, again, I'm missing a little bit of a paint wash there to make it look more realistic. Likewise on the belt, but these are separate pieces, and they are very nicely sculpted and work quite well. The articulation for this figure is pretty strong. Of course, she has the ball jointed head there, so of course she can spin it right round. It looks up and down a huge distance, no hindrance there, and pretty fantastic stuff. I'm always slightly more nervous with the female characters because she's got the ball jointed shoulders and she's got that pin swivel at the elbow there, but there's always a sense that, yeah, it's going to snap. And this always worries me with the female characters. It just, you feel like you have to really force it. And I don't want to just snap it off or bend the plastic too much. So, yeah, you have to persevere with this a little bit in my experience. She does have the pin swivel at the wrist as well though, which is great, and of course they do arch inwards and outwards, and thankfully the gauntlet there is movable and it doesn't block the hindrance or get in the way of the articulation of the wrist, which is great. She's got that upper torso ball joint as well, which is great, so of course she can look up and down, she can kind of swivel from side to side and arch herself to one side or the other, which is really, really effective. I like this joint a lot. Just as with the male figures, of course, she can kick her legs out to the side. She's got the upper thigh swivel there. Legs kick forwards and back. And she's got the double jointed knees. Once again, this is topped off by the ankle pivot there, so the foot does hinge forwards and backwards and, of course, swivel from side to side. And as for extras, well, she comes with an extra pair of closed fists and a pair of gauntlet claws. These look really, really cool. As you can see here, really quite effective. I think overall this figure is a solid 4 stars. Really like the sculpt on this. I think the paint apps are really well applied. I think it looks really colourful and interesting, and I think it's quite versatile in terms of its look as well. So yeah, I'm really, really pleased with this figure, and it won me over. Moving on to Rogue, I think in theory this figure should have been absolutely fantastic, but there's definitely some issues which we'll get into. But I think the most pleasing thing about the figure is the presentation. The colours on this figure are absolutely fantastic. They're so vibrant and bright, and I absolutely love it, and I wish they did this more often. Again, there's definitely some issues in terms of paint wash on this figure, most noticeably of course in the hair, but I have to talk a little bit about this head sculpt. The face is absolutely fine, but the hair, it just looks to me like a hat. Like, it just, I can't not see it as that. It just looks like one of those big fluffy hats, and that's not right. Now, of course, they've been looking at the source material, and her hair is radically different in this run, naturally, and it is very stylized, but this, maybe it's taken a little bit too literal. I don't remember it ever looking quite like this. Yeah, it's a bit too much, and like I said, it just looks like a big hat. And to make matters worse, again, it really needed a paint wash running through it just to make it look more like hair, make it look a bit more detailed, because it looks like a big plastic hat right now. That might just be me, but I'm really not feeling it. Also, something else to be mindful of is that she does have one of these irritating little extra leg piece things, which the X-Men figures often have. I wish they just sculpt this in. I understand why they don't. It's much cheaper to do it this way and just slide it on, but it annoys the hell out of me, because every time you pose it, it slips down. That being said, I do think the boots might be new. Now again, I could be mistaken, but I don't recall seeing these before on another figure, so if it is a brand new piece, that's really awesome. And as I said, they're very well painted. Definitely there's not a lot going on in terms of shading, but the colours that are on here are absolutely fantastic, really vibrant, really colourful, and I love this. Now, one good thing about the hair, though, is that it doesn't get in the way of the articulation, so we have that at least. That is a small mercy, but it's actually quite important. I think they've done a fantastic job here again. The ball-jointed neck works really well, and thankfully the hair doesn't stop it looking up or down, which is great. Now, she's got the ball-jointed shoulders there, which don't go all the way out, but that's due to the sculpt. If you notice that they're kind of baggy sleeves there, so I think that's what's causing some issues. She's got the pin swivel at the elbow, and the same again at the wrist there. You'll notice that the cuff of the sleeve, though, again is a separate piece. They will slide up and down. That's a good thing in terms of the articulation, there's no hindrance there, but in terms of the design and how it looks, it doesn't look like it's all part of the same glove. She's got the same chest joint there that allows her to spin from side to side, look up and down a good distance as well. And like I said, I'm really big fan of this. This works really well. The collar is a separate piece, and that can be a good or bad thing. It all depends on your point of view, I suppose. The legs kick out, there's an upper thigh swivel, but again, watch out for that, that plastic piece falling down, that's going to happen. Legs kick forwards and back, and of course, double jointed knees there as well. Sadly, there's no swivel at the top of the boot. It is all moulded into one piece, which is a shame, but we can fall back on the ankle rocker there. That pivot there is really, really good, so of course it will arch forwards and backwards and swivel from side to side. And for extras, well, not a lot really, just an extra pair of closed fists. It's a bit disappointing really. Rogue has 2 looks in the comics, and she actually has a cape in one of them. Of the two, I do think this is the more recognisable look, and it's certainly more colourful, but I think the other one with the cape probably would have been more fun and more interesting. For me though, this is another 3 stars. There's no paint wash, I really can't stand the hair sculpt at all, that's really bad, and she's very light on accessories. Now, Iceman, a bit like Shadowcat, was one I wasn't really massively anticipating. I've had Iceman figures before, his look isn't too different here, but wow, he really caught me by surprise. This is a fantastic figure. Straight away you can see this is a really nicely presented toy. The sculpt on this guy is really, really cool, and it's only little subtle things. So obviously there was extra spikes coming out of his chest and on his back there, on his arms, and of course in the head. But you may notice as well that there's actually some subtle white paint going on in this figure just to accentuate the sort of the ice and the cold, and wow, it's really, really effective. It's really amazing to me how just a slight bit of paint here and there can just change a whole figure, and this is really impressive. As you can see, there's just these little white accents of white paint running throughout the figure that just really enhance the figure, just at the tips of things, just to make it look a bit colder, a bit more solid ice, and it's really, really super effective. Most striking is on the back here, where those sort of crystals are coming out of his back and in the head, and I just think this looks absolutely magnificent. But the best part is he is a translucent plastic, so when you shine a light through him, wow, he just lights up and he just looks like crystal, like ice, and this is brilliant. Also, the sculpt is really clever because the articulation is not hindered at all by those spikes, and I was pretty sure they would be. So his head can look up and down and go all the way back there with no problems whatsoever. He can look from side to side, no issues. Absolutely brilliant. Of course, he's got the ball jointed shoulders, the bicep swivel, the double jointed elbows, and of course the pin swivel at the wrist as well. And again, no hindrance here whatsoever in terms of those extra crystals hanging down. Doesn't stop the articulation at all. He's got the swivel at the waist moving from side to side, and the ab crunch in the upper chest there. And here it's no problem at all. It looks absolutely fine. I don't think this looks unsightly in any way. Legs kick out to the side. We've got the thigh swivel. Legs kick forward, they kick back, he's got the double jointed knees. And of course he's got the ankle pivot there as well. Now sadly there is no swivel in the lower calf or anything like that, but he does have that articulation at the ankle, and that's all you need really. Sadly not much in the way of extras, just a pair of extra ice hands. Final thoughts then? Ooh, he's a 5-star figure for me. He really caught me by surprise. I was not expecting this at all, but I think they've done such a fantastic job with this figure. He's made of a plastic, like I said, that is translucent, which is really very, very cool. But it also has a really nice texture to it. But that said, they haven't skimped at all when it comes to the paint apps on this, because they've got enough there just to make it look really detailed and look quite realistic. His articulation is fab and the sculpt is brilliant. He might be light on accessories, although I'm not quite sure what else I would have given him. Maybe some ice effects, perhaps but really, with a figure of this quality, that all feels by the by. This is absolutely fantastic. Last, and probably least to be fair, we have Cyclops. Now I have to say, this was the other one that I was really highly anticipating. I'm a big fan of Cyclops, but I really particularly like his AOA look and his run in this series. But you can probably tell straight away, he isn't everything he should be. Now, the sculpt is not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but he has that really hard, solid hair, and you know it's going to cause problems for articulation. The other major bugbear, well, it's the paint apps. To be fair to Hasbro, I think they've done a better job than I worried they might do when it comes to his gold armor pieces. I was really worried that they were just going to be moulded in that gold plastic and not have any paint detail on them whatsoever. Thankfully, they have tried to add some scuff marks on there, just a few flicks here and there, and it looks quite good to be fair. I'm really pleased they've done this, and this will do for me. Sadly, there's just nothing anywhere else. So the legs, the gloves, the torso, it's all moulded in that one blue plastic, and yeah, there's just no detailing on it. But without the paint wash, you just can't make anything of it, and it just, yeah, sadly just feels a bit cheap and plastic looking. And the same is true of the head sculpt. There's nothing running through the hair there, so it's just it just looks like a cheap plastic brown bit of mullet. And you know, the same on the face. There's nothing in the visor or anything. It's just like, oh, this is very disappointing. As for articulation, well, I said there'd be trouble. He can spin his head from side to side, to be fair, but you know, when it comes to looking up and down, it ain't happening. Like, it just, you know, yeah, there's fractional movement there, but it's frustrating, and yeah, his head can't go all the way around if you want it to. It's very limited. Then he's got this plastic gold piece here for his shoulder pad. It's a soft plastic and it does move, but it's a bit of a pain, to be honest, when it comes to the arm articulation. Yes, he's got the ball jointed shoulder there, he's got the bicep swivel, he's got the single jointed elbow, and he's got, in theory, the pin swivel at the at the wrist there, but again, the articulation there is massively hindered. But sure, he can swivel from side to side, and he should be able to use that ab crunch to look up and down. And to be fair, you can get some movement out of it. It's not too bad. It just doesn't look right, and there's problems, obviously, with that bandana. His legs kick out to the side, he's got the upper thigh swivel, but you might notice that mine looks almost bandy-legged. And sometimes you get that with Hasbro Marvel Legends, where it's like this almost rubbery kind of plastic that they use, and it's just, yeah, it just feels really cheap. He does have a swivel at the calf though, which is kind of cool because a lot of the others don't, and he's got the ankle pivot as well, which is pretty fab. And that's it. There's nothing else. There's no extras whatsoever apart from the builder piece. There's no extra hands. There's no blast effects. There's no accessories at all. And you know, wow. I mean, they could have thrown something in. I mean, yeah, an extra pair of hands perhaps, because he does have 2 closed fists, so an open hand would have been kind of cool. But you know what? I would have loved an optic eye blast effect. That would have been really cool. Maybe a swappable head. You know, there's a couple of different things they could have done. Very, very disappointing. So I'm afraid for me, this is a 2-star figure. A massive disappointment for me. Like I said, I was really anticipating this, but yeah, he's just not that good. His articulation's massively hindered by the head sculpt, by the shoulder pads. The paint apps in the main are non-existent. There's nothing running through the body. There's no paint wash. There's no little things just running through it to just enhance the sculpt at all. And then to cap it off with no extras whatsoever, it's just really frustrating, to be honest. So there you go, we're now building up a pretty healthy collection of Age of Apocalypse X-Men. This is just a few from the first 2 waves, and of course doesn't include any of the villains. But wow, it's starting to look really, really cool. Got me thinking about what might come next, because I think there's a 3rd wave here. We still really need Mr. Sinister, he's one of the major characters in this series. Likewise, Havoc, Cyclops' brother, we've got to have him. Then there's Angel, Banshee, Quicksilver, and you know what, I would really love a Banshee. I think we're desperately overdue a re-release of Banshee. So this outfit would be really cool, but hey, even his standard outfit would be pretty cool. And then there's Gambit, Jubilee, Strong Guy, and for builder figures we could do something really cool with Abyss, or my personal preference would be to have Holocaust. He was done once before as a builder figure many years ago by Hasbro, but I think he's due an update and a revisit. So I think there's a lot of life left in this series, yeah, and if it continues to sell well, then I'm pretty sure we will get these. For one, I'm really enjoying them. I think this is a really strong 2nd wave. I actually think this is better than the 1st wave overall. The 1st wave had quite a few stinkers in my opinion. I wasn't a big fan of Wild Child or Jean Grey. But to be fair, this time around, there's only really Cyclops that isn't very good, and, you know, Magneto is disappointing, but the others are surprisingly good, actually. Anyway, stay tuned as I will be doing a review of the Colossus builder figure in another video coming soon. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.